So I finished Maniac. It's a new Netflix show. It's kind of out there. I'm going to try to explain what I think it's trying to say about individuals and psychology, and I think it has to do with becoming your parents, becoming your own worst fear, then what it has to say about technology and our relationship to technology, and then how it weaves these two things together into, I think, one central theme. If you had to give it one theme, I think it's about acceptance. So first, becoming your parents. So the scientist, James, who's heading up the study, he has this mother who's a self-help guru, and James hated his mother's work, hated how his mother was overbearing and smothered him, and wanted to get away from her and said, look, I'm gonna be completely different than her. I'm not gonna be this abstract, frou-frou self-help stuff. I'm gonna be science and logic, and I'm gonna develop this very meticulous system for curing people. And you think that he's going in the complete opposite direction, becoming completely his own man, but he really hasn't escaped his mother's shadow at all. He's still close to her. Geography-wise, he hasn't moved away. He's still in the same field as her, and really, his method is a lot more similar to his mother's than he'd like to admit, and he actually creates this computer that's modeled, he doesn't seem to realize it, but it's clearly modeled exactly after his mother. And when his mother and this simulation computer system that he's created actually interact, you see that they're a lot more similar than you'd think. And his mother, who's smothering and overbearing, probably thinks she loved her son a lot. Really, she comes up against this somewhat robotic computer and recognizes a lot more of herself there than she'd probably like to admit. And then this relates to Annie, because Annie, originally we thought her problem was just this tremendous guilt she felt for being partially responsible, in a sense, for the death of her sister. But it turns out what her real fear was abandonment, and she has borderline personality disorder, and her big issue is abandonment issues, and then also running away from people herself. So her mother ran away from her and her sister, caused all this angst and suffering for her, but also the worst part is she sees all these same traits that she hated so much in her mother and caused her mother to cause her so much pain. She sees all these traits reflected in herself, and in some sense, her fear of abandonment oftentimes leads to her pushing other people away and doing the very same thing that traumatized her so much in her childhood. And we know this because in the last episode, Annie's talking to her dad, and Annie says, first, Mom, your wife left you and left you devastated, and then I was around and I had all these same traits that you saw in her, and I was just this reminder of the pain she caused you. And then ironically, that part leaves her to leave, and her dad thinks that she's left him forever towards the end, but she goes back, which is nice. Also, pill A was reliving your worst trauma. Pill B was kind of confronting those traits that you fear and kind of the root cause of what makes you the way you are. And Annie, she's role-playing as this thief who kind of manipulates people, and when she's having the talk with Justin, the scientist, after, he's like, do you see these traits of the thief? Do you see it in yourself? And she doesn't answer, and then he's like, do you see it in a parental figure? And the answer is actually yes to both. It's interesting, the diagnosis that Annie gets is borderline personality disorder, and a part of that is engulfing people, being so scared of abandonment that you just smother people, but then also pulling away and fleeing, and it's this kind of constant cycle between these two things, and oftentimes preemptively pushing other people away because you're so scared that they're gonna hurt you. And remember, in her pill B, where she's the thief, her biggest thing is she's trying to act like she's this badass, and she doesn't want anyone to see how scared she really is. And he sees how scared she is, and that's one of the reasons she falls for him. When she refuses to take the picture of her sister on that last trip they're taking together, she tries to play it off like, oh, she's too cool for it, she doesn't want to do this sentimental thing, but really, I think she's just terrified that as soon as she takes that photo, the fact that her sister's leaving and abandoning her is finally going to become concrete and real, and she just can't handle that. Moving on to the technology, why I think they structured the world in this way, and it looks so strange. In some ways it's very futuristic, in other ways you look at the technology they have and it looks so primitive. I think that a lot of times the crazy weird stuff we do with technology and we accept it because the designers of the technology, they've gotten so good at making it look so sleek, so futuristic, so user-friendly, so comforting, that when we see artificial intelligence and these other really out there concepts put in technology that looks as clunky and as strange and as primitive as it actually is, rather than being in this package, this sleek, stylized package that you see in something like a modern cell phone, it just looks so comforting, futuristic. When we see technology put in this way, it's very interesting. It makes us maybe reevaluate some of the things we're doing with technology. So you would think, well, I would never, you watch this show and you think, well, I would never trust a computer to go rooting around in my subconscious and fix all my issues, but that's only because the computer we see here looks so silly and primitive, and it's just a bunch of blinking lights in the shape of a face, and obviously it's nothing, it's not comforting, and I would never trust it. But the technology we would be likely to see if we got this option of letting a computer solve all your issues would likely be a very, very polished, maybe it would even look like a person, like a wise counselor who's really wants to help you with your problems. So by taking these concepts and putting them in rather ridiculous packaging can really make us maybe reconsider just how much are we going to give to technology. And certain things like advertising, which on the internet we're constantly bombarded with ads and we put up with it because we like free stuff. Here you get a free bus pass, but rather than it being a kind of very non-intrusive advertisement, it's just an old pushy salesman barking right in your ear. So it just, again, it's a way of highlighting these things that we've kind of come to accept because of how polished the packaging is when you put it in its just brute form, and it's just someone barking in your ear trying to get you to buy something. Some people are going to see a little more sinister. And some people accept technologies like this for convenience. And a woman on the show at one point says, you know, I have real friends, I just use the surrogate friend program where people pretend to be my friend because it's more convenient. You know, I have real friends, it's just, this is more convenient. But other people do it because, fall prey to these technologies because it allows them to create this fantasy world and they have trouble accepting reality. And that brings us to, I think, what the show was trying to say, and it relates to Owen. So Owen, his diagnosis is paranoid schizophrenia and also cowardice, which I'll get to that in a second. So paranoid schizophrenia, he makes all these connections in the world that other people tell him aren't really there. He reads too much into things. He reads deeper significance into these grand conspiracies where he has this destiny and he's destined to save the world. Now, the show seems to go back and forth on saying, does he need to face up that these aren't true and he needs to just accept the reality that everyone else is telling him, or does he need to just embrace his own reality, his own version of events? And early on, one of the first quotes we get is, why do we privilege this reality versus all the other realities that also exist or might have existed? And is an interesting question. And you look at why should he not privilege his perception of events just because they don't line up with most other people's? And you might say, well, there's just a practical reason why you should accept the version of reality that most other people have. But on the other hand, it seems like when he's been forced to testify by his family and they're telling him, you know, don't believe your perception of events, you know, your brother's innocent, believe our version of events. And it's interesting, their last name is Milgram, and you know, a famous Milgram study where it showed how obedient people are to authority. And it was interesting that his big moment is kind of standing up to his parents and asserting, no, my reality is correct, this reality you're trying to force on me isn't. So yeah, I'm not exactly sure which side of the issue they're really falling down on. And when they take pill 2, the book they mention that they're both trying to find that last chapter of, the book is Don Quixote, and in that there's a guy and he pretends that he's back centuries ago and he's this gallant knight, you know, fighting dragons and, you know, saving damsels in distress, and other people just think he's crazy and a lunatic and, you know, fantasy land, and everyone else is laughing at him. On the other hand, you can see it as this triumph of the spirit of just, you know, he's not gonna let reality impinge on his fantasy, and he wants to be a knight. You know, he's gonna do it no matter if no one else, and literally no one else in the world, agrees with his version of events. And when Owen's having that date at the diner, and he talks about the Gnostic Gospels, and he says that, you know, Jesus had a lot of disciples, a lot of them wrote Gospels, but only a certain number eventually got accepted and become the Bible that's, you know, the foundation now of Christianity. And he compares that to our brain, and he says, you know, at any point, there's more going on in the world than our perception can take in, and way more things happen to us than we can store in memory. So in a sense, you know, our brain's kind of like the Council of Nicaea, and it's just constantly, you know, creating and deciding, you know, which parts of reality are going to become the reality for us. And, you know, it's interesting. I don't know, I'll stop there. I don't know exactly what it was trying to say, but I think that I gave enough there that, you know, let me know if you had a completely different interpretation, or if you think that was kind of some of the stuff at least they were going for. And by the way, the director of this, Cary Fukuanda, he's directing the new James Bond, and that action sequence, that long tracking, he did a great one in True Detective, a long tracking sequence there, but he did another one here where they're in this wood paneled government building and there's this big firefight, and it was just so well done. They got the gun you kind of hold at your hip, and the guy cranks it and it starts to go, and then he gets shot, so he falls over and the bullets, spray all over, and the camera, it follows kind of the way the bullets are just going along the walls, and then eventually the camera follows and the bullets go to where they've moved, and now they're in a completely different area. But it was just a really cool sequence, and I think that it bodes really well for the new James Bond, and we could have some really awesome action sequences in that, because clearly he does a lot of other stuff well, but these kind of long action sequences, he's got a real talent for them.